Okay, this is our demonstration on shadow drawing and value drawing. Just to give you a quick preview, when you look at shadows, the shape of the shadow is going to change quite a bit depending on the light, the amount of light, and the direction of the light. So as I move the lamp farther away from the ball or the sphere, the shadow stretches out and gets longer. If I bring the light source lower, the shadow really dissipates and dissolves into the rest of the light in the room. The higher the light source, the smaller and the shorter the shadow becomes. So, and I'm speaking of the cast shadow here. The rest of the light areas on the ball just shift a little bit in size. So I'm going to just kind of create a pretty medium shadow and light source on this object, and then I'll draw this for you. So we have a few areas here that we've talked about in class. There's the highlight, which is the bright part. We have the middle value area, which is right between the highlight and the shadow. We have a cast shadow that's very clear and distinct. And then right down here, we have what's called a balance point shadow. That's the darkest shadow at the base of the object. All right, so I'm going to begin drawing this object right about here, just so you can see it. We've talked about drawing perfect circles and rotating the paper. I'm going to skip that step because I don't want to disturb my subject. So this is the general shape of the ball. I sketch that first, and then I'm going to sketch the general shape of the cast shadow that I see coming out. Typically the cast shadow will fall from about the center of the object, so I'll find the center. And then this cast shadow starts slightly before the center, so I'm going to draw that coming forward and around. It's not a huge cast shadow, but it's pretty large. I'll slide this forward slightly so you can see a bit better. And that's going to shift the light a little bit. So here's my cast shadow coming out, and I have this right in front of me to look at, so that makes it much easier. And then the other thing I'm going to put on is kind of a landmark, is the line that we see from the top side of my notebook. I'm going to just put my line straight across here as kind of a landmark in our drawing. So this is just the sketching stage. I'm just going to create a little value map of where everything goes. Now from this angle, the cast shadow comes to about the middle of the ball horizontally. Now that's not always true, but because this is raised, the shadow falls a little differently on the second part. So the cast shadow comes up quite high on the back side of the ball, and that's not always the case, but I will draw it as I see it. So on this end of the cast shadow, the values are much, much lighter than they are on this end. And I'm just going to kind of create a little map of that where I see the division. So from about the center point, if I go over a little bit to the left, I see that balance point shadow shooting out. And it comes out here, and it's a little bit darker. Now inside this, there are just a few irregularities in the light and the shadow. We have window light hitting this object as well as the light from the lamp. So I'm just going to kind of outline these irregular spots on the edge quickly. And now within the ball, I'm going to separate where the different values go or would go. So right about here on the ball, I see a cast shadow, or I'm sorry, a shadow that's pretty strong. And it comes up and curves around to about there. And right about here, I see a lighter area. Now this is called reflected light. We talked about this a little bit in class. The light hitting this edge also hits this surface and bounces back and creates a little light area within the shadow region on the ball. So there's the darkest part, and then my middle value is something along this edge like that, perhaps. It's not really clear. I will adjust it as I shade a little bit more later on. So now I'm going to begin shading. Now typically when you start to shade, you want to start with your lightest values, and you want to use the side of your pencil and make a nice even tone. It's always good to kind of draw or shade in the direction of your object. This is really, really faint, so I'm just going to fill this in, and then I will go on to the next part. This is a bit darker, so I'm going to put a little more pressure on my pencil to make a darker value. going around the edge of this. And here it's a bit lighter again, so I'll make that light. The highlight of this area I'm going to leave completely white, and then I'll go on to my cast shadow and balance point shadow. At the bottom of the ball, this is where my balance point shadow goes. I want to make sure that this is dark and sharp. So I'll put a little more pressure on it, fill it in. Then the next really dark area I see is the line. I'm just going to add a little bit darker value there to make sure it stands out. And then the rest of my cast shadow, it's not as dark as the balance point shadow. Where I see little darker snippets or parts in there, I'm just going to apply more pressure and make it darker right away. Now when I get this close to the ball, I notice how these two edges are starting to blend together, and I want to make sure that they're distinct. When I look at the ball, this is a darker shadow than what I see in the cast shadow, so I'm going to add that darkness right away, so it does not get lost and my image doesn't disappear. So I'm just going to shade a little darker into that edge all the way up to the top and all the way through. So now that everything's shaded in pretty well, the next step is actually to blend and soften these values, and we're going to use a tool called a tortillon. Tortillons are rolled up paper stumps. You can purchase them or you can make them from toilet paper, but I have one that I believe is purchased. Oh, nope. Here's my handmade tortillon. It's a rolled up piece of toilet paper. I'm going to use it, the small end I'll use for the smaller areas, and the large end I'll use for the bigger areas. So I'm going to start blending. I'm going to try and pick a clean side of the tortillon. I'm going to start blending between the highlight and the middle value here, and I'm just going to soften this up. And when I do this, I apply a lot of pressure, and I also use a small circular motion like this. So starting here, and then I'm going to go between my middle value and the shadow on the ball. And I'm being careful not to go outside of the edges too much, so I have a little less work to do and clean up. And now I'm going in the reflected light area up to the shadow area to blend it together. Starting to smooth out a bit. That all looks pretty good. Now my concern here is losing the edge of the ball between the cast shadow and the ball itself. So I'm going to just blend a little bit in this area and then go back and fill in. Here's my balance point shadow, blending that in, and larger cast shadow. Alright, so everything's there and it's blurry. So now I need to go back and make some repairs. So on the inside of the ball here, I want this to be sharp. I'll just shade along the edge and bring it in slightly. And on the outside of the ball here, I'm going to go a little bit with my pencil to create more pressure. And then I'm going to use my eraser to remove a little bit of light. And I'm going to turn a little bit more here and make that balance point shadow darker and sharp so that it pops out the bottom of the ball. And then the line between our paper, I'm going to give that a little bit more sharpness so that pops out a little more. And this cast shadow. So this is looking pretty good right now. And then the outside of the ball on this side, I'm just going to try and make this a little more clear, and I'm going to use my eraser to get rid of any sketchiness that I don't need. And I'll wipe it away, and then the edge of the cast shadow, same thing. And then on this edge, I have a little bit of a line. I can hide that line by shading into the background area. So when I do this, I'm again using the side of my pencil. I go up and around it. And then I'll use my tortillon to blend. my ball rolled away. Okay. So there's that. And then, so this edge stays sharp and clear. I'll use my eraser again to make sure that edge does not disappear. I want enough definition between the edge of the ball and the background so that the ball looks round and pops out. But I don't want it to look like it has a halo, so I need to spread that value out. And as I come around to the shadow area on the ball, I'm going to let my background value really fade out and be very, very light. Okay, so this is our demonstration on shading and value. If you haven't practiced this in class, I need you to practice it at home. You can use any type of ball to do this type of drawing. I'm just going to remove this last little highlight area. And then I'll put the ball back so you can see what I was seeing. So I'm pretty close. I think that there could be a few more repairs in here and a little more darkness to make the ball resemble what I was seeing a little bit more. But most of the regions are a pretty good likeness. So you get the idea. You can do better. You can probably do more. So go for it.